So I'm going to, use the time-honored thing called counting. So we're going to start with room one. And, it's entirely up to you what you tell us, but it's just sharing some aspects of your discussion, what things you thought were ridiculous and what changes you want to make, and anything at all you can bring to this. So room one was Dagmar, Leo, Omalabake, excuse my pronunciation, Patricia, Pierre-Antoine, and William. So who is speaking on behalf of room one?
Dagmar will, I think, no?
Repeat a couple of works. Hi, Wayne. A couple of works we were discussing. We see that the proposal already is very strong. So as basis, we had some difficulties to find what can we add or delete or something. And we found at least one place reframe that only related to AI literacy. For example, in the first point, it is maybe too few. It is maybe better, but it was one of the opinions to tackle digital literacies. And one of them is AI literacy, but we also have data literacy and others. So that was one of the suggestions, and we were then discussing that it should be more evident in the document that it is there is a need to count on the different actors in education, which is not happening now. So we are told what to do with AI, or that we have to use AI in this and these other settings, but we are not asked whether this is appropriate. So we need to change the narrative, and we need to take action and get our agency back. If it is not appropriate, we are the ones that need to say no, stop doing that, and maybe this could be more or clearer in the document. So the agency, the decision making on those that are the ones, for example, the teachers and so on, and not from the administrators, which actually is EdTech people imposing sometimes tools on us.
Fantastic. I really appreciate those comments. They're really good. And Dagmar, it's lovely to see you. So did anybody else want to add anything from that room before we move on? Okay, well, let us move on then to room number 2. So this was Aftab, Jen, Jyoti, and Lindsay. So who's speaking on behalf of room 2?
Hi, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. Right, I think it's me. I got nominated just at this. We all got kicked out of the room. So we have made a few little notes on the Google Doc, and so I will just try and summarize some of those. So we had a really useful conversation about just defining what we mean when we're talking about artificial education and intelligence. So just linking back to some of the conversations earlier in the panel around kind of artificial intelligence not being one thing, and also education, are we talking about schools, or are we talking about something much more wider than that? We had some points about just making the language really clear and obvious, and thinking hard about who we are including as our audience for this statement. So maybe we can frame the language so that we are arguing positively for something rather than against something. It's sometimes just a bit tricky to think about advocating for something to not be used. There was the beginning of a conversation that needs much more time about what we mean by human values, specifically in relation to technology and digital values, and what do we think that is, and could that be potentially excluding of some really important aspects? we talked about the use of the word ethics as potentially subject to ethics washing or being dismissed as only about individual privacy, when actually we want to foreground politics and justice, perhaps more than ethics, and what terms might resonate with different communities. And then the last couple of points were about who we think we want to collaborate with. So, are we talking, is this a document that communicates primarily to the research community, or are we talking about collaborating with educators, with teachers, with industry, with policymakers? And the final point about actually how can we author and share case studies? So what does good look like, I think, is the question there, as well as being critical about arguing for what might be problematic. How can we also kind of take tangible steps to showing kind of what responsible and positive scenarios might entail? Okay, anyone else from my group want to chip in on any of that?
No, that was amazing, Lindsay.
Yeah, that was a great summary, Lindsay.
Okay, well, it's great notes, so
Thank you, Lindsay. Really appreciate that. That's very, very cool. Okay, moving on then to room 3, where we had Fiona, Lisa, Marika, Nashwa, Ted, and Wendy. Who's speaking on your behalf?
I'm happy to speak. I think we nominated somebody in time, but I think echoing some of the previous points that Lindsay made, we also were thinking about who the audience was of this document, and also which publics we're trying to collaborate with. So we added a 0.7 to the undersigned agree to sort of making research findings more accessible to the general public, whether through partnership with civic organizations. So that could be policymakers, unions, it could be teachers, it could be a whole range of audiences, and possibly some mechanisms for doing that. So we thought maybe, whether dissemination through the media or through briefs or through newsletter approaches. I think also we were keen to sort of maybe think about advocating, or in addition to partnering, thinking about other partners in the context of perhaps industry research partners as some possible groups to sort of work towards, sort of think positively, as previous groups have mentioned, sort of framing, advocating for not doing certain things, but doing other things in that case. And I think in the top portion, in terms of context, we thought maybe that the first point could be worded with a little bit more sort of clarity and strongly, that there is indeed increasing impact on education of AI, but that comes from certain locuses of power. And I think perhaps naming those, make them explicit, may be helpful. In addition, point 2, adding a bit about perhaps bias in that. And then in point 4, on the critical studies of AI, I think, as Jeremy sort of mentioned before, but doing a little bit of historical contextualization of previous research in both AI, but also more generally in critical studies of technology, more broadly could be sort of useful, as this is not, AI doesn't come from nowhere, nor does this field of research. So I think precedents are maybe helpful. I think that's what we mostly were able to talk about. If anybody else wants to add anything, please go ahead.
Okay, Ted, thank you so much. Really interesting stuff again. Again, we're just demonstrating how rich this this domain of research is. So let's move on to room 4 then, where we have Mark, Mickey, Patricia, Roberta, Ron, Sarah, and Yo-Yo. Good to see you, Yo-Yo. And Ron, people I know already. Lovely to see you both, and others as well. So who's going to speak on your behalf?
I'm speaking, Sarah Howard.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hello, everyone, first of all. So we had a quick run through the document, and to echo the other groups, I think I imagine this would be a bit of a forward, who's the audience, what have you. We felt that point 2 needed to be, or rather, a section of point 1 needed to be decoupled. So to talk about AI literacy needed to be its own point. It's quite important. So we have AI increasingly impacting on education. That's a given in the field space. it raises complex and controversial issues. We moved that up to 2, and went to look at it in terms of ethics, data privacy, and equity, however, rather than the longer list, to keep it pithy, to keep it, again, thinking about the audience. But that literacy, AI literacy or digital capability, something in there. There's some talk around where AI is a literacy, where does it fit in that space? We might want to think about, again, it's more of an audience thing. But I think in this also, we talk about points, the last 2 points, looking where we moved to critical studies. It's not clear what the why, what is critical studies bringing to this space? What is it contributing to it? And what is it, why does it matter? I think some real clarity around that, again, really driven by who's the audience of this. I assume the audience of this is policymakers, other researchers, people not inside the camp, we said. For the we the underside agree, and these notes are all in our group document, that industry very much needs to be brought into this. This was spoken to in the plenary session, that we really, when we talk about our stakeholders, collaboration, it's got to be cross-sector collaboration, to really take advantage of it, to bring education closer to developers, industry, to really be able to make an impact with having industry think about ethics or think about how we deal with our data. Also, just in terms of that we need much more clarity around the underside agree. It's very much about collaboration. What it doesn't touch on is the participatory nature, the element of justice, the things that we talked about quite a bit in the keynotes and in the plenary. It's not visible in there. It's very much about collaboration, which is also important, but it's kind of washed out some of the other really important elements that I think we want to bring into the space that come from that kind of critical lens and that critical reflection. So it needs to be kind of drawn all the way through it. For the group, does anyone else have anything else to add that I didn't touch on?
Okay, Sarah, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to reading the comments directly. So let's move on to room 5. Room 5 was Bokyung, Camilla, Karen, Kirsten, Russell, Sarolta, and Stephanie. So who's speaking for that room? We have no volunteer. Kirsten, you're
Okay.
in my line of sight.
I'm going to try my best.
Thank you.
So I think we had a very rich conversation. We didn't really pay like a lot of attention to the wording yet of the document, but it brought up thoughts for us about bringing multiple lenses to address ethical frameworks. So like using a plural rather than saying ethical framework, thinking in terms of, so a lot was also about collaboration and what the previous speaker just said, the participatory nature of this group and this work, and how we might want to frame that, for example, in terms of special interest groups that could then focus on particular things, but especially also bringing in student and teacher voices. So really working from the ground up, because this is like framed as a research community, but it's really important to bring in those voices, and also bringing in voices that might not be here in the panel this morning. It came up engineers and computer scientists, and there's a lot of work being done in those areas too. So to really try to bridge out and bring in more people. We also talked about, like I said, diverse ethical frameworks, bringing up the notion of multiple literacies globally, and including indigenous voices, expanding AI literacy, so also considering other types of literacy, and then really strengthening the international perspective, which seems to be a real strength of this group, because there's people from all over the world here right now, and to really see what is being done in different contexts, and related to different social structures also, and how might that impact our work. Decentralized and centralized governance towards guidelines, but also looking at what's already being pushed out on various levels. Here in the US, for example, by states and different universities. And I think that was the main thing. Does anybody from my group want to add to that?
Well, Kirsten, from my perspective, that was very comprehensive. Thank you. And just a quick note, we're not going to shut these documents anytime soon. So if you've not commented, it doesn't mean to say you can't comment. Please just go back to the document at your leisure if you have anything else you think you'd like to add. But everything so far has been so positive and helpful. So moving on to room 6 then, where we had Eva, Michael, Naringa, apologies if I mispronounce, Peter, Susanna, anybody, and Tony. Anybody who's going to speak on behalf of that?
I've nominated to speak. Hi, it's Eva from Bath University in the UK. It feels like Eurovision or something, this, doesn't it? Kind of like beaming in from around the world. We looked at the document, and our initial response was that it looks good, it looks fine, there's kind of not much there you can kind of disagree with. And then Michael very helpfully undercut all of that with the comment that maybe the fact that it feels quite, that we kind of all agree might actually be problematic in itself, that there might be something there that it's perhaps a little bland, that it's not kind of like challenging enough. And I thought that was really interesting. We talked about, because it's not really sort of saying critical what of, it's perhaps could be more specific in some ways. We talked about what is the purpose of it really? What is it trying to inform? I think it was group 3, I think, mentioned something about informing policy, and we talked about that because we were talking about our kind of roles informing policy in our universities regarding AI, and we talked about the possibility that that's what this was about. So it kind of like felt like there perhaps wasn't a strong sense of purpose to the document. We talked again, like other groups, about the fact that AI isn't just one thing, and that there was a danger perhaps that there's lots of things sort of like getting like scrunched in there. We talked about the direction and perhaps it having a sense of where this is going to it. If anyone else wants to chip in at this moment from my group, that would be great.
Hi, I want to say something. I'm Michael
Brilliant.
From the National Institute of Education, Singapore. I think one of the things that we wanted to add was, just echoing something that I think Group 3 might have mentioned. Something to do with what does literacy mean? I think we need a better understanding of what literacy means. For me, I think it has something to do with not only reading, but writing, in this case, of intentions, as in the intentions behind the use of technology as intention amplifiers. The other thing that we might want to think more deeply about is this idea of the critical perspective. What might this critical perspective constitute, and how might we make sure that the language of criticality is not co-opted by certain more powerful groups? And with the second half of the document, the undersigned bit, there's one's, let's see, okay. Sentence 2 says, disempower teachers. This part seems okay, but it's interesting. I want to tell a very, very short story. And I was in the Gujarat province in India once, and I was led into a very interesting room. It was a panopticon-like surveillance center that has video connections to all 25,000 schools or some number of schools all across the province. At any one time, administrators from that center can open up a video link to any school in Gujarat province and surveil what's going on in the classroom at any time. this to people in high-income countries would seem highly disempowering. But in their context, it's seen as a way to address corruption because it's seen as a perennial problem that there are some single room schools, right, where teachers are paid by the payrolls, but they don't show up. So is it possible that sometimes for in LMICs where sometimes we want to make changes where we have to sort of in some way force people to do something for their own good? So that is something that needs careful attention.
Yes, I think the word careful there, Michael, is absolutely
Yes.
right. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And I think, one of the things that always strikes me is we're talking about often, problems are found and theoretically a technology is introduced to solve that problem. But often it means the problem's not properly understood. And often it means the technology is not the solution anyway. Okay, let's move on. So moving on to room 7. So there we have Bieka, Candace, Dawit, Fatima, Jyotsna, and Tara. Who's speaking for you guys?
It's me. I didn't have any excuses why I couldn't speak, so I was voted in.
I think that's fair enough.
So yeah, we stopped on the first sentence, and we're discussing how we know the impact of AI on education and questions about the extent of the impact of different sorts of AI on different educational environments. And that was an interesting question in itself that the research that the document alludes to would hopefully tackle as one of the key considerations of a critical approach to AI is what impact is it having? What kind of impact is it having? Are there things in place that are trying already to stem that impact or increase that impact? So that was one of the first things that we immediately saw. I think the other main thing was considering it's absolutely brilliant that this is an international endeavor from the start, that alongside talking about sharing and collaborating, it's also the acknowledgement that everyone is looking at and researching AI in different cultural contexts, and the importance of not looking towards a homogenous idea of looking critically at AI globally, if that means ignoring the very real differences culturally across the researchers in this area. Those are the two main things we talked about, I think. And if anybody else in the room wants to chip in something I've missed.
Well, thank you, Candace. That was terrific. And one of the things you're talking about impact, I completely agree with you. But one of the things, the problems I think we have is what do we accept as good evidence of impact? What do we mean by evidence? And I think that's another hot potato that we need to engage with. Okay, I'm conscious of time. So moving on to room 8, where we had Antoine, Dina, Henrietta, and Karen. Who's speaking for you guys?
Karen, I think you should. I've nominated you. Sorry. Do you mind?
No, that was a bit of a surprise, but that's all right. I will certainly do my best. We sort of started by looking at the first section of the document, and we didn't have much time to get to the second. And some of our comments have been echoed by some other groups about wanting to ensure that there are cross-disciplinary perspectives taken into consideration, acknowledging the fact that this research and explorations of ethics are happening in multiple locations within and outside of academia. We also had conversations about involving teachers in our efforts, and also of involving students, both within the research communities and inviting their perspectives and impacts. We had some conversations, just some sort of minor ones related to what language we might want to use, but we were really trying to focus our time on the macro level considerations of trying to frame this in a way that would be welcoming and invitational. We did have a little bit of a discussion about how sometimes, critical can be a means of excluding people or having individuals maybe get their back up or feeling excluded. Didn't necessarily mean that we had to change the title, but that we wanted to make sure that we were invitational to the broadest range of individuals possible. Also recognizing that critical studies of AI, the now a well-established research domain, we sort of removed the now. There are people who've been doing ethics in AI since 1940, and people who did their PhDs in this, in 1968, and are saying, hello, we've been here for a long time doing a lot of this. So making sure that we're able to capture individuals who have been engaged in this type of work for a very long time, and making sure there are opportunities for them to speak with people who might be bringing new and different perspectives. And we also gave some consideration to including industry within the purview of this type of research, and making sure that their voices and perspectives were also things that were being heard, and giving an opportunity maybe for them to, people in those industries, to listen to some perspectives from other areas.
Thank you, Karen. I have to admit that engagement with industry is something I do a lot of, and I always find quite difficult. And it feels like we're often being sidelined by those conversations, but getting them to listen to us as well as us listening to them, I completely agree. Thank you so much. Okay, so moving on to room 9, we've got Alexi, Barbara, Emmanuel, Kyungmee, Neslian, and Shaylee. And again, apologies for my mispronunciations. Who's speaking?
I'm speaking, but Wayne, Barbara.
Please go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, hi. And we were not all those people. We started out with 2 of us, and then we got a 3rd, and then just at the end a 4th. But I don't want to bring up everything that everyone else has said, but we also agreed with that one of the sentences was written negatively, and could it be turned to be more positive. But we talked, also bringing up just what Karen has just mentioned as well. We talked about, and as someone who's been in the field for a long, long time, at least AI in education, we can't forget that there has been a lot of research that new researchers don't necessarily know about, that are other things that, like Karen mentioned, the ethics stuff that's been done before as well. We have to, and we've made a comment on one of the points about this, that we have to remember the research that's been done for decades, because there's lots of really good research there. So who is it we need to bring into this sort of collaborative collaborative and interdisciplinary approaches to make sure that everybody who is relevant knows about this and the possibility to be here. And also the very important part of the ethics, and these things are very culturally dependent. I'll say one quick thing about some work we've done nationally in Norway. There's a very big fear that AI is going to make education very individualized, which goes against everything, at least in the Nordic countries, where we look at learning as social. So different things come into that. And then this big aspect of the research that goes on in universities and has been going on for many years that never makes it out to the classroom, and how the commercial has really taken over and being in the classrooms now. And what Wayne brought up now, we need this evidence that is not there. And how do we get this evidence that we need about what's going on in the classrooms and those things? And also the fact that, we've had this disruption with everybody talking now in education about AI, but and if we think about it, it's about the natural language processing generative models that have come up now that people have access to, and they're giving us big problems in education that we as small researchers probably can't attack. Like, what does it mean then to accredit people for being a doctor or for working in different jobs? I mean, our whole society is based on examinations and things like this, and that's exactly what this AI is, this new AI that's accessible as generative AI is challenging. So those are huge problems, but definitely this aspect of how that disruption has to be attacked. And also we have the nice Kyungmee has written that respect previous research efforts made by educational research for decades and bring them back to the conversation. So taking the ownership of this back to the educators and not leaving it in the hands of the commercialization that's going on right now. Yeah, I think, what else did I forget from my group? Anything else you want to add?
Okay, I'm going to jump in then. I love the word that that Jeremy, I think, introduced earlier today in talking about the amnesia and the amnesia, we forget what's happened before, and I think you're absolutely right. Okay, moving on, we have 3 more rooms to hear from. So room 10, that was Anna Diaz. Oh, I'm going to fail. Is it Inchi? I'm so sorry. And Mayana. I'm useless. My apologies. I'm trying my hardest. Who's speaking?
So hello, everyone. Michael asked me to speak. So not to repeat many of the ideas that have already been explored before, just 2 main things. So concerning the first aspect, where it says to continue to research the connections between AI and education, we reinforce the idea for the schools not to be sidelined. So it's really important to bring to these discussions, if not K-12 teachers, if they are not available to join, their insights, their lived experiences. So the part of the schools, the way these communities, parents, teachers apprehend, understand, and live these experiences with AI are really important, and we must bring this into conversations. So not to sideline the schools in our debates, and the schools through the ideas that teachers and parents and students create within them. And regarding, I don't know already if it's the 3rd or the 4th, because we have made some changes here. So where it says to foreground ethics, we were also discussing the importance of agency, and to have here the word to foreground education ethics, aiming to avoid very broad and superficial discussions on ethics. So this may enable us to redefine agency within the educational environment, recognize it as an ethical concern, and focusing on specific aspects of individual and collective agency that is promoted within the educational spaces. So this involves participation in the reflection on how these technologies integrated into pedagogy either facilitate or impede key aspects of agency, such as cultivating intentionality, foreseeing consequences, making deliberate choices, and fostering self-reflection. And this emphasis on agency is also particularly relevant for valuing self-evaluation practices that we sometimes forget, and they are so important for our development. So also exploring collective agency becomes significantly important within the teacher community, whether in teacher training or other organizational practice. So the idea was, can we reinforce the idea to foreground education ethics, to make us focus on agency as a part of ethics when we talk about ethics within the school context. So I think it's this. I don't know if someone of my group wants to add something.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. Anna, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. So we got 2 final groups. So room 11 was Ala, Caroline, Omar, and Priscilla. So who's speaking on behalf of that group?
Well, obviously we didn't actually agree who would speak. I mean, I can very briefly say something, and then somebody else can maybe come in. I think we probably spent the first 15 minutes trying to work out how to edit the document, and then who was meant to be the group and who wasn't, and what we were meant to do. So I think it was Omar made, I think, a very insightful point about this. Is probably also what is happening in schools with AI. It generates its own kind of chaos, and it never goes according to plan. And I think having being able to pay attention to that would be really interesting, rather than assuming that the impact, for instance, that AI has is embodied in the intentions of the designers. So that was in response, I think, to the first point. I think we only got to about point 2, I have to say, but I thought that was quite a nice point. That it would be it was a good state. It was the document as a whole was very good, but it was very important to look at practice and to attend to all the unexpected kind of consequences, impacts of AI, as much as what we expect or what AI kind of corporate companies might expect. I think then at the end of that first statement, there was this notion of digital literacy, and Priscilla talked about the work that she was doing around AI literacy as well. And we had this quite extended discussion around the importance of bringing in 40 years of work on literacy and what literacy is. It's a very, very interesting but very complex concept. And as a community, we probably shouldn't reduce it to simply competence or simply just kind of criticality. But there are lines of thinking that we can bring in from associated areas and develop them. So AI itself is also not new, or the intellectual resources that we bring to it are not new. So I think that repeats what other groups have said, that in fact there's lots of work that we can bring in from previous kind of objects of interest that have huge relevance to the study of AI in education.
Thank you,
so
Karen.
That's as far as we got. So, but a lot of it was just like, oh yeah, how does this work? Which, yeah, I'm sure other groups had that as well. But Priscilla and Omar and Ala were the other people in our discussion.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in with a couple of comments.
Please.
Yeah, I would like to add some perspectives to the third and fourth point on the Google document. For example, the third idea, it acknowledges that while there are pockets of innovative work in artificial intelligence and education, there is a notable fragmentation within the research community. And this suggests that despite exciting developments, there might be missed opportunities for synergies and collaboration. And bridging these gaps can potentially lead to more impactful research and practical implications. And one more idea that we've discussed in the group about the fourth point, it's about growth and establishment. Yeah, it reflects that there are positive shifts, and it reflects that this positive evolution of critical studies in artificial intelligence in education. And we've heard about these ideas during the first part of the symposium. And the mention of this well-established research domain implies that it has moved beyond from its nascent stages and is now recognized, yeah, as a legitimate and significant field of study. But the presence of dedicated journals and such events as we are having today in conferences further indicates its maturity and the commitment of researchers to contribute to the body of knowledge. But if I could add, just like a person that comes from a totally different area, not from computer sciences or information technologies, I'm from pedagogy, from education, from language education in particular. From my perspective, combining the efforts of professionals from both humanities and IT is really critical, and that will contribute to both artificial intelligence field and education. That would be highly beneficial. And this interdisciplinary approach could bring diverse perspectives, methodologies, skill sets to the field. And in such a way, fostering a richer understanding of these complex interactions between artificial intelligence and education. And it could lead to more comprehensive research and innovative solutions, even though this field has been researched for ages, as we have already discussed, yeah. But then we might come up with a more holistic approach to addressing the challenges and opportunities presented by artificial intelligence in educational contexts. Thank you very much. That was a pleasure meeting all the colleagues and discussing these ideas.
Thank you, Ella. I really appreciate that. Okay, so last but definitely not least, we move into room 12, where we've got Ben, Lee, Maria, Motus, I apologize, and Sonia. So who's speaking on behalf of this last but important group?
It's me, I think, Wayne. It's Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Hi, Wayne. Hello, everybody. And forgive me, the rest of the group, if I don't quite capture what we got to. But we had an interesting conversation about AI literacy as a kind of a long-term goal and process that we all subscribe to. But we were raising questions as well about not just presuming AI literacy to be a good thing, but also recognizing that this could be very difficult to implement in practice. As Caroline mentioned a moment ago, there's a long history of different literacies to be drawn on, often which have not translated into schools very effectively for various different reasons, including lack of interest from policymakers. But also that AI literacy might mean very, very different things in different contexts, and it can be co-opted and reframed, often in quite narrow ways as competencies or skills, as others have said. On the second point, we just threw in what could be a kind of an extra kind of complexity, which is the problem of opacity, the lack of explainability and the lack of accountability in many machine learning and AI systems. That opacity stems from a number of reasons. There's technical complexity, systems simply aren't explainable, and then there's proprietorial secrecy. So companies don't want to let you know how their models work, but for commercially sensitive reasons. On the point 3, just a reaffirmation of greater levels of participatory involvement of students, precarious educational workers. I think Helen in the comment in chat earlier on mentioned those who do support work with students, for example, who are on the most precarious contracts and possibly most likely to be automated. We also discussed working on the developer research interface. And forgive me, I've got a bit of a bug going on, as you can hear, so I'll stop them. Anybody else wants to add, please do.
Thank you, Ben. Hope you get over your bug quickly. For those of you that know, Ben has done a lot of writing in this space, and his contributions are always very welcome, as is everybody's. Well, listen, thank you so much to everybody for all your ideas or your comments. As I say, we'll keep these documents open for the next few days. So if anything comes to mind, then please don't hesitate to jump back in and add the comment. Our next step will be to try and pull this together, and we'll do this in a small group because it's obviously challenging to write as a much bigger group. But once we have a new draft based on the conversations and the comments, we will share that again with everybody to make sure that we are going in the right direction and make sure that we think this is something worth having. But yeah, I mean, fantastic. And lots of ideas that I'd not thought of, lots of ideas I've been struggling with, really important. So thank you very, very much.